You're listening to The Unsafe Bible with Pastor Ken Brown.
The vision of the stone itself is of an organic development kind of a thing that goes back at least to Isaiah. We see it as part of Jesus. And the stone, when you see mountain or great mountain, that's also a term used in the scriptures of government or ruling. So this becomes a great mountain. In other words, Christ winds up ruling the world. His administration takes over the world, and it fills the whole view as Nebuchadnezzar's looking.
When you have dreams, what do they mean to you? Do they seem meaningless? Or do you ever try to interpret some greater meaning from them? Today, Pastor Ken explains that just like Nebuchadnezzar from the Bible, sometimes you need to take a closer look at your dreams through God's lens. Nebuchadnezzar had a dream, and it was only after the Lord interpreted it that he was able to understand the massive meaning it had for his life. Give your life to the Lord and let Him take away your burdens. Well, let's join Pastor Ken in the book of Daniel, chapter 2, as he begins his message, A History of the World.
A lot of the stuff in Daniel is so specific, and as we move along, you will be blown away by the specificity that he gets to. I mean, down to marital relationships and who's cheating on who. He really gets into that with some of the kings and so forth. And he will get into, in chapter 2, he starts covering things that are happening in the news today, and he talks about them. And it's just kind of mind-boggling when you see it. So we're going to get up to chapter 29 to 43 as we take a look at the history of the world. In advance, this is the dream. This is Nebuchadnezzar's dream that we're talking about. As we learned last week, Daniel has taken the next step with his walk with the Lord, and by virtually trusting Yahweh to do something that nobody else has ever trusted him to do. How would you like that to be your next step of faith? You know, Joshua's next step of faith was sun stand still, and for 32 hours the sun didn't go down. Daniel's next step of faith is, I really need to know what Nebuchadnezzar dreamed. That's a step of faith, okay? He wants to have that dream revealed to him. He needs the dream revealed to him, and then they have the appropriate interpretation for it. Because remember, we talked about the fact that all the wise guys had volume after volume after volume of how to interpret dreams. And Daniel will never touch those books because he has the Holy Spirit dwelling inside of him, and he's hooked in with the one who can tell him what the dreams are. But the bottom line is that they're trusting God to show up. And here, it's not if God doesn't show up, things will be bad. Here, if God doesn't show up, he is literally going to lose his head. He will be toast. In fact, Nebuchadnezzar said he would take the wise men and rip them limb from limb. This is what he has looking forward to, but he's trusting in the Lord, and the Lord's going to take care of him. So he's going to trust what God has to say. So let's take a look at verse 24. We'll kind of cover a little bit moving back into it. Therefore Daniel went to Arioch, and this is after he found out everybody's being put to death, went to Arioch, whom the king had appointed to destroy the wise men of Babylon. He went and said thus to him, do not destroy the wise men of Babylon. Bring me in before the king, and I'll show the king the interpretation. Then Arioch brought in Daniel before the king in haste and said thus to him, I found among the exiles from Judah a man who will make known to the king the interpretation. The king declared to Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, are you able to make known to me the dream that I have seen and its interpretation? Daniel answered the king and said, no wise men, enchanters, magicians, or astrologers can show to the king the mystery that the king has asked. But there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries, and he's made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will be in the latter days. Your dreams and the visions of your head as you lay in bed are these. To you, O king, as you lay in bed, came thoughts of what would be after this. And he who reveals mysteries made known to you what is to be. But as for me, this mystery has been revealed to me, not because of any wisdom that I have more than all the living, but in order that the interpretation may be made known to the king, and that you may know the thoughts of your mind. Now remember, Daniel is maybe 19, 20 years old at this point. The king is probably in his mid-20s. They're both young men. Daniel, though, unlike the king, didn't grow up in the court. He got a 1,700-mile detour and is a prisoner. Then he went to school at a university 1,700 miles from home and couldn't go home. So this statement that Daniel makes to the average Jew who is reading this, just the average Jew in 500 BC or reading it after they've returned, this is a huge statement, because what Daniel is saying is that Yahweh has revealed the future, not to a Jew, to a Gentile. That's huge. It tells you that things have changed. We are entering in what's called the times of the Gentiles. It's no longer the times of the Jews. So God is now working and revealing himself and his future to Gentiles. Well, that's not a good thing for the Jews, because they have problems with that, and they're going to have problems with that. Now, in the context here of Daniel chapter 2, where he says the latter days, to include all the visions that Nebuchadnezzar receives, he is talking about the fact what Nebuchadnezzar dreamed about starts in 600 BC and goes at least to 2018, possibly 2020, 2030, 20. I mean, it has what he's dreaming has not ended yet. So that's a lot of history that he's going to have in this dream. It's huge from that perspective. Nebuchadnezzar is being provided a history of the world in advance, direct from God. Yahweh is providing it to him in advance because he knows everything, and he's sharing it with Nebuchadnezzar and shared it to him within a dream. Now, some context for you regarding the state of the world in 600 BC. What was it like? Now, when Nebuchadnezzar dreamed this dream, because we're going to be touching some of these countries, Persia was a Babylonian vassal state. They paid tax to Babylon. The Greeks were just a group of warring tribes, and Rome was a small village on the Tiber River. Okay? This is all at the same time. There was no human way that he could actually see what God was going to do as he starts naming these kingdoms, especially when you understand from context where the countries were historically at that point in time. They were nowhere. Let's take a look at it. This is the Assyrian-Babylonian Empire, okay? The Assyrians started off and then the Babylonians conquered them. But the Babylonian Empire actually reached all the way down to Ethiopia, towards, it goes all the way down to the Red Sea, the Persian Gulf as well. I mean, it's a big area. It stretches a huge, huge area and goes all the way up into the Kazakhstan and some of those places as well. It was a big area. Daniel has clearly identified that the source of his information regarding the dream is the result of a revelation from Yahweh. He did not get this because he had taken the class at the University of Babylon on 101 ways to interpret dreams. And he didn't do that. This was given to him specifically by God in a revelation. And what God did is he provided the king of Babylon a revelation. And this is unreal to have that kind of thing happening. Because God is the revealer of mysteries, Daniel is able to do the impossible. He's going to be able to read somebody else's mind after the fact. I can't even read my wife's mind before the fact. I sure would love to, and I'd love to read her mind after the fact. It'd keep me out of a lot of trouble. But Daniel is going to be able to do that. He's going to do the impossible. He's going to interpret the dream, but he's going to tell the king what the dream is about, and only God could tell him that. The fact is there's a God in heaven, and he does reveal secrets. And Daniel declares this to the king, and he explains his dream as an inspiration of God and shows him the circumstances. And God's going to tell him what happens at the end of days. So when you see that term, end of days, that's a key word in the scriptures. It means last days, the coming of Christ. That's what he's talking about, okay? So in just a few words that Daniel has used at this point, he has taken the king who has a worldview that there are all these gods. I have to do weird things occasionally to worship them. They're in control. I have wise men who are worthless. And they're supernatural, but not really, really, really supernatural. His entire worldview was destroyed in about 6 sentences by Daniel. When Daniel tells him exactly, I know what you dreamed, and God's the one who showed it to me. It's shaken him because his worldview has been shaken as a result of this. By the way, this also shakes up again the worldview of most Jews in 500 BC, and it would definitely shake up Jews during the time of Jesus reading this. This is why there's a lot of people who would love to late date this book to the time of the Maccabees. It's not. It doesn't fit. It was written by Daniel, and he's the one that did it, and he wrote it around 600 AD, or BC rather. It's all prophecy. The thing is, though, that because God is doing this, and a Gentile is being used of God, the worldview of everybody is being destroyed. God's just basically saying, I'm in control and you guys aren't. Daniel proceeds to remind Nebuchadnezzar, because he had fallen asleep, at the time he fell asleep, he was thinking about the future. He's a typical ruler. What do I need to do next week? What do I need to do next year? Do we need to get that irrigation project in to provide more crops? What do we need to do? Do I need to go and attack somebody else? Do I need to expand my kingdom? Things like that. Those are the things he's thinking about. Who's trying to kill me today? I mean, that was important to a king in that day because there were a lot of people who wanted them dead. But the dream that God gave him was a divine revelation, and it was a divine revelation of the future. Now, like any ruler, he's concerned about the future. He's only been king for 2 years, remember? 2 years and some months. What's his reign going to look like? How long is he going to reign? How long will he be there? What's his legacy going to be? How long is Babylon going to last? How does he fit in? What does it all really mean? I mean, he's asking the same questions a lot of people ask today. It's no different. He's trying to get answers. Daniel further goes a little bit beyond that, though, and he acknowledges to Nebuchadnezzar that Yahweh is the one who's going to provide that answer and provide revelation directly to the king. Verse 31, you saw, O king, and behold, a great image. Now, at that point, Nebuchadnezzar knows, Daniel knows what he dreamed. And I can just see him moving up on the edge of his throne. He really wants to listen to this now because Daniel knows and the king now knows he knows. This image, mighty and of exceeding brightness, stood before you, and its appearance was frightening. The head of this image was of fine gold, its chest and arms of silver, its middle and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. And as you looked, the stone was cut out by no human hand, and it struck the image on its feet of iron and clay and broke them into pieces. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold all together were broken in pieces and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floors. And the wind carried them away, so that not a trace of them could be found. But the stone that struck the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. That takes about 15 to 25 seconds to read. At this point, Nebuchadnezzar knows that Daniel knows. He knows there's a God in heaven. He knows there's no way that man could tell him what he just dreamed, and Daniel just told him what he dreamed. Can you imagine the worldview, what's going through Nebuchadnezzar's mind at this point? Who have I just brought into my court? Who is this guy? What does he know? How many of them are there? Are there more like him? I mean, it's just, I want him on my staff. I mean, I can hear all of the different things going on in his mind as he's thinking this. But whatever doubts that he had that there's nobody who could do this, and it was a simple way for him to get rid of a bunch of guys that he thought were useless, and whatever naturalistic views he had, they're gone. Daniel has just eliminated it. He now knows that there is supernatural. He knows that God exists and that God operates not just in the physical realm, but also in the spiritual realm. And now he has to confront that reality. Now remember, the first 3 chapters of this book explain to us how Nebuchadnezzar wound up being saved. That's what this is all about. But it's also showing that God can use anyone and can change anyone's mind. The revelation in chapter 2 doesn't give enough detail by itself to really know what the kingdoms are. But when you start adding Daniel 7 and Daniel 8 to it, you know what they are. It becomes incredibly clear. The identification is absolutely unmistakable. But before we look at the detail, look at something obvious. That stone. It's not part of the statue, is it? It's cut without hands. The metals succeed each other as parts of the same man, starting at the top, going down. But the stone comes from someplace else. So we need to pick up on that. Daniel knows the dream. The king knows he knows. Supernatural? Yes. What Daniel's just done is impossible. But with God, all things are possible. And yeah, it's weird. It's kind of weird. Hey, tell me what I dreamed. Okay, the Lord showed it to me, and here it is. That's a little weird when you stop and think about it. But it's about to get even weirder with some of the interpretation and then some of the language in this that starts moving you to a different realm altogether. It's kind of strange. Now, this is what he dreamed. As he was dreaming, Daniel's explaining this to him. You see this statue. Here's this statue. It has a gold head. And then, of course, there's iron. Now, when you see the iron, you'll notice 2 legs. And you start going, 2. What's that all about? And there is something all about that. And then you get to the feet. Now, there are some commentators who will actually say that the legs and the feet are a single kingdom, but there's great pains. There's a lot of detail given to you about the feet where there's not a lot of detail about other things. Those feet, partly clay and partly iron, are very intriguing when you stop and think about what does that all mean. It's just different. It's remarkable, though. Did you notice that it reflected light? Daniel said it reflected light. It was shiny. It was exceeding brightness, is what he says. And it was seen as standing very close to Nebuchadnezzar. So Nebuchadnezzar's dreaming, and he sees this huge statue standing right next to him, just kind of like what we saw in that video. And when you stop and think about it, that could be terrifying just by itself. And the effect to him was frightening, and he says that. Now, something else about the statue. Did you notice that as we started at the top, and as Daniel explains it, you start with one material and the materials start changing? Okay? That's intentional. Did they increase? By the way, as you look at the materials, do those materials increase or decrease in value as you start at the head and go to the feet? They decrease, right? Yeah, they do. Now, there's something else interesting, too. Now, the head is made of one metal, gold. That's it. It's just one metal. All the other parts had more than one substance, with the exception of the arms. So, in other words, the head is just the head, but we'll start seeing there's other things going on as well. For example, the upper torso is silver, but further down it's bronze, still in the upper torso, which is kind of weird. Just the head is gold. It's not the head down to the ears and then the ears down. It was just the head. So that's kind of interesting. As you look, and you've already picked up on the fact the value of the metals decreases as you go down, right? This image is also very top-heavy. Okay, I'm a science nerd. The specific gravity of gold is 19. Silver is 11. Brass is 8.5 and iron 7.8. This is very top-heavy. It just kind of does this in the wind. And the feet are made out of iron and clay. Or if you want to look at it differently, iron and pottery, basically. And the substances progress from the softest to the hardest. So the gold is soft and the hardest is the iron down at the feet. And the feet, well, have you ever been able to get iron and clay to join together in anything? Not easy to do unless you have glue. Lots of it. The clay in view is probably the kind that they use as tiles in construction projects. You cannot get it to adhere to iron. It's just not possible. But it's a strange statue, right? Kind of an interesting thing to see. As Nebuchadnezzar steps back and looks at it from head to foot, he makes out that it's composite in form. He sees that. It's different substances. He sees that. He sees the head and the chest. The head's gold, the chest and the arms are silver. He picks up on that. Its middle and thighs are bronze, legs are iron. He sees all that. That's kind of bizarre. The feet, that's really bizarre. They're serious bizarre. The language that explains the feet is very unusual, especially when you start digging into the original language. It starts bringing up all kinds of other things. But It's odd. It's a feet of clay. By the way, feet of clay, that's where that statement comes from, is from the statue. But you have this impression of instability, this huge colossus that's there, but it's still terrifying because you think it's going to fall at any second. Now, Daniel relates the next event of the dream clearly, showing the instability of the statue. A stone cut without hands strikes the statue on these highly unstable feet, crushes them, and everything falls. Now, here's the test question. What's the stone? Jesus Christ. Okay, that's the stone. Luke 20, verse 17 and 18. Again, you have expositional constancy in the scriptures. When something is introduced as a specific type of, it remains that way throughout Scripture. It's amazing how God did that. Luke 20, 17, and 18, he looked directly at them and said, "What then is this written? The stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone." Jesus talking about himself. "Everyone who falls in that stone will be crushed to pieces. When it falls on anyone, it will crush him." Isaiah 60, verse 12. "That nation and kingdom will not serve you, shall perish. Those kingdoms shall be laid waste." Talking again about the stone, Jesus, who's going to crush the kingdoms at the end of the age. Isaiah 28, 16. "Therefore, thus says the Lord God, behold, I am the one who laid as a foundation in Zion a stone, a tested stone, a precious cornerstone of a sure foundation. Whoever believes will not be in haste." Again, pointing to Jesus. Isaiah 8, 14 and 15. "He will become a sanctuary and a stone of offense and a rock of stumbling to both houses of Israel." And he was. "A trap and a snare to the inhabitants of Jerusalem. And many shall stumble on it. They shall fall and be broken. They shall be snared and taken. Then this stone becomes a great mountain and fills the entire earth." The vision of the stone itself is of an organic development kind of a thing that goes back at least to Isaiah. We see it as part of Jesus. And the stone, when you see mountain or great mountain, that's also a term used in the scriptures of government or ruling. So this becomes a great mountain. In other words, Christ winds up ruling the world. His administration takes over the world, and it fills the whole view as Nebuchadnezzar's looking. So back to the text, verse 36. This was the dream. So Nebuchadnezzar now is probably really sitting on the edge of his seat. If this was today, he'd probably have the popcorn out. He's really wanting to know what's going on. He's listening. He's got the notepad out. Whatever it is that he needs to understand, he wants to know this. And then there's this statement. "Now we will tell the king its interpretation." Who's with Daniel? God's with Daniel. Yeah. But that's an interesting comment. We'll talk a little bit more about that. "You, O king, the King of kings, to whom the God of heaven has given the kingdom, the power, the might, and the glory, and to whose hand he is given, wherever they dwell, the children of men, the beasts of the field, and the birds of heaven, making you rule over them all. You're the head of gold." Okay, so far that's good news, right? Daniel's keeping his head. He's told the king, "Hey, you're the top. You're it." But he adds some things as he explains it. Now, back to the first thing I pointed out. Did you catch it? Now, we will tell you. Who is we? It's an echo of Genesis 11. Remember, he's in Babylon? Remember what happened in Babylon way back in Genesis 11? Some guy named Nimrod and his minions wanted to build this giant ziggurat so they could come to God on their own terms. And God says there, "Let us go down and check out what they're doing."
You've been listening to a message about the inspiring book of Daniel in the Old Testament. Pastor Ken has been diving deep into this book here on the Unsafe Bible. Something that stands out repeatedly is that Daniel went through many trials by fire, showing his faith in the midst of being in exile and an enemy to those who didn't fear God. But every time God came through for him, proving that standing up for your faith brings honor and blessings that can't be attained by the ways of this world. Have you had situations like Daniel's, where you've gotten in trouble for proclaiming Jesus as your Savior? The cost of worldly demise is worth it in staying true to God. It's no easy path to take, but Daniel's example is a stellar one to follow. Do you have any questions about what you heard today? If so, don't hesitate to contact us. You can get in touch with us by going to theunsafebible.com. Once there, go to the Connect tab and click on Connect Card. There, you can fill out a form for us to get in touch with you. To listen to this message or any others from this series in Daniel, just look under the Media tab at theunsafebible.com. You'll also find additional teachings in other books of the Bible. If you found this ministry to be a blessing as you've been listening, you have the opportunity to help invest in the Unsafe Bible ministry by checking out the Give tab. We're grateful for any donation given to help further the message of the gospel. That website again is theunsafebible.com. Join us again for another edition of the Unsafe Bible.